Trump and saying, well, if you apply the teachings of the church on these principles to this election, you're going to come to that conclusion. It's simply the difference between a conclusion you would come to. Now, some people may not come to that conclusion. I've had people say to me, well, I can't vote for him because he's for abortion. I mean, that's a judgment that, because the difference is that's what would not change about our teaching. Our teaching, the church's teaching, is you advance the right to life in the election. How do you do that? Well, that depends on the candidates. What position do they take? And so that would be the distinction. Being nonpartisan doesn't mean that what you're saying doesn't lead you to a conclusion. Of course it does. It needs to. Otherwise the church would be making herself irrelevant to the election. We don't want to be irrelevant to the election, but we want to make it clear from what source does our advocacy spring. Because if it were, and this is another way that you can understand the difference, if it were that we were gathering together a press conference in order to endorse Donald Trump, well, then we would be endorsing and defending everything he stands for and everything he says. His campaign needs to do that, just as Hillary's campaign needs to do for her. But if a candidate, no matter how close they may be to a moral position that we are advocating, departs from that moral position in some way, shape, or form, we would not defend that. And that's the difference in the role between a campaign and the church. Yes, sir.
Yes, Father. I am a journalist, and it's true that God is not a Democrat nor a Republican,
right,
nor of any political party that I'm aware of. My question goes to the Donald Trump issue.
Yes.
And because, although you're not endorsing him per se and directly, the implication is to vote for him. Here's my question. Because he is so personally iniquitous, immoral, misogynistic, by all evidence that reason and experience leads us to see, how can it possibly be an ethical act of a voter to support him?
If the alternative is worse, that would be the ethical evaluation. Let me re-articulate your question, because this is a concern that many people are raising, and they're raising it to me, to us, to everyone. How can I vote for a person that I judge to be immoral? And I say that I judge to be moral. As you say, people have to look at the evidence. One of the things we've been urging people to do, by the way, because we do want to approach elections as Christians in a Christian manner, is that it does need to be based on evidence, as you said. Some people are basing things on rash judgment. We have to be careful of that. Making a distinction, again, as the bishops say, another phrase that they use when they're guiding people is to analyze campaign rhetoric critically. So everything that is said about someone, we have to ask, well, is this campaign rhetoric, or can we be critical about this? What is the evidence that supports it? So just as a caveat, we don't want voters voting based on rash judgment. Oh, he insulted me or my people, or therefore. Because the question we're looking at is, okay, can you vote for someone who is immoral? The answer is in certain circumstances, you sure can. You sure can. Why? Well, because if the only other alternative you have is worse, and when I say what alternative you have, I mean of viable candidates who are actually going to win. Only one of these two people, save some totally unexpected development, one of these two people will be the next president. And so can a person morally, even though they say, well, neither one of them lives up to the moral standards that I have, either in policies or in personal life, and those are two different realms, but if neither one lives up to the standards I have in those areas, does that mean I absent myself from the voting process? No, I argue that means you take the best that you can. Now, not that it's in any way on the par of importance, obviously, but we do this all the time with our choices. When I sit down at a restaurant, I know I have in my mind my favorite meal, and I'm going to be looking for that lobster tail, with the melted butter. But if I don't see it on the menu, what am I going to say? Oh, I don't see what I like here, so I'm not going to eat at all. I choose the best of the available options. And the same thing we do when we're buying anything or making other choices in life. So we acknowledge the standard of morality. We're not saying that character doesn't matter in public life. It does. But when we say the alternative is worse, again, I go back to this. No judgment on Hillary Clinton. I mean, how much did she lie about certain things? I don't really know. Like you said, the same standard has to be applied to both candidates. What is the evidence? So if the evidence leads you to conclude, hey, she lied, she put the country in danger for this or for that, okay, you make your best conclusion. But the policies being enacted, when we talk about what ends up in the evaluation of John Paul to be a tyrant state, or for example, she said it again last night, I stand behind Planned Parenthood. Well, any candidate that's going to stand behind Planned Parenthood or defend Planned Parenthood or fund Planned Parenthood, are they taking into account the sexual morality of Planned Parenthood? They want to come into our schools, teach our children how to have all the mechanics of sex without the meaning of sex, how to have sexual pleasure with one another or by themselves, and sure, defend Planned Parenthood, fund Planned Parenthood, but then don't come back to me and talk about sexual morality, because you're talking about the most sexually corrupt view of humanity that can possibly be held. And again, this is a moral advocacy. Planned Parenthood is a corrupt organization. Not only morally, it is a criminal enterprise. Criminal enterprise. For example, coaching couples on how to avoid the male partner from getting into trouble with the law for committing statutory rape against a minor. We have it on tape, hundreds of taped conversations of Planned Parenthood employees doing this. And this is why I say, again, obviously, the judgment of the voter, we highly respect. The conscience of the voter, we highly respect. But what we're saying is, these are some of the things that you need to evaluate as you look at the candidates and the parties.
Sir, I'm a journalist with a bad throat today, but you do understand that Trump is the only candidate in history who, leading to the election, is under indictment for fraud. For that phony university, he couldn't use the word university anymore, that he was running the parade on low-income people who thought they'd make a lot of money. As for an immorality, his play game in between and during lives hardly justified a suggestion of morality as a structure. But those two things, he could be elected and still have to face an trial for fraud, because the trial does not take place until the day after the election. I mean, how can we view that as a moral kind of selection?
Well, see, that's the thing. We wouldn't view, again, and based on whatever the evidence is, one would have to look at all those details. We wouldn't say that what's immoral is moral. We wouldn't say it. We wouldn't say that it's acceptable. We wouldn't say either that it isn't offensive to us and to our fellow citizens. Again, we're not choosing in the election between the candidate and a higher moral version of the candidate. We're choosing between the candidate and the other candidate. And that's where this this evaluation comes in, what I'm saying, when the alternative is worse, in the totality. Of what? Of the direction they're going to lead the nation. Now, if somebody talks to me, as a priest, if someone came to me and said, Father, I did all these immoral things, and, when somebody comes to us for guidance, one of the things we tell them, besides you need to repent, okay, is you need to make reparation. Do something good to make up for the bad. And whatever the past or present immorality might be in either of these candidates, I could not possibly imagine more of a reparation for evil than to steer this nation in such a direction by signing the right legislation and appointing the right kind of judges to begin eradicating this nation of the kind of immorality that we're all concerned about, or that unfortunately some are not as concerned about as they should be. And that's again where it's not, a vote for a candidate is not a statement making any immorality they may be guilty of into something moral. It's not. it's again a choice between, bad and worse. Okay, in some respects. In other respects, it is a choice between good and bad. Again, in the direction, what kind of policies are they going to be implementing in the country? What kind of again, going back to the question of the judges, these are things with high moral implications as well. And so that's how we're saying you do the calculus in this situation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got a question about the vice presidential candidates. Now, I'm not going to use their names, but one vice presidential candidate has a pro-life record by far better than all the presidential candidates of both the major and the third parties, all put together. He's absolutely the best, all right? Now, vice presidents, as you know, can succeed presidents, and Richard Nixon and George H.W. Bush did that after 8 years of the president, Gerald Ford after resignation, and Lyndon Johnson after the death of John Kennedy. And the two presidential candidates in the major parties are the oldest in history. So the fact that they're old even ups the odds of this vice presidential candidate becoming president someday.
Okay.
How can you have pro-lifers visualize Vice President Umpty Squat, the pro-life vice president, without specifically endorsing him? Pro-lifers should do that, because I have seen people, pro-lifers and Republicans, who will not vote for the presidential candidate at all.
What you're saying goes along the lines of what we're trying to do by, again, drawing attention to the positions of the parties, because the selection of the VP is, and has again played out in this election, going to be a person who holds to the philosophies of the platform, perhaps even more strongly than the top of the ticket. And by the way, that's true with all the other appointments too. Again, all the cabinet members, you surrounding yourself with people who are going to be 10 times stronger in whatever direction your party leans than you yourself are. And so that principle is, again, a nonpartisan. It's a factor in the moral consideration of your vote. Take into account who's the VP. Because when you say that applies to every election, every year, in fact, in every nation. It's a principle. Expand your thinking beyond the characteristics of the presidential candidate and look at who does he or she bring with them into these different positions. And many of the pro-life people, and certainly people in other issue areas, are making exactly that calculation that you just said. Do any of but Deacon Keith here is an attorney himself, and you want to make any additional comments on anything?
Yeah. And again, because you said I am an attorney, and I am an attorney, 36 years, constitutional lawyer. I've been co-counsel at the U.S. Supreme Court on matters of significant constitutional importance. And the appointment of justices to the U.S. Supreme Court is so vitally important. It will affect the future of this nation for 30 years or more. And the next president, I believe personally, could choose up to 4 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. We are talking about significant decisions regarding, once again, restoring the right to life of our youngest neighbors in the womb, religious freedom as a fundamental right protected by the First Amendment. These are such important issues, and the difference between these candidates on who they will select as justices is overwhelmingly clear. It matters. Now, we can argue as much as we want as to whether the court should have that kind of a role with the separation of powers, which I believe in. I'm a constitutional thinker, but it is what it is, to use a common expression. And the court right now is in a position where they will be deciding these cases, and soon. Cases such as the HHS mandate case that my good friend Father Frank has been fighting, along with so many others. So, how will we treat the little sisters of the poor and priests for life? Will we in fact once again reaffirm what the founders affirmed, that religious freedom and the free exercise of religion is robust, and it's a fundamental human right? Or will we continue to whittle away at it to the point where we keep out of the public square people who are orthodox in their beliefs, as Christians, as Jews? That's a serious, serious matter. Now, when you listen to the debate last night, it was very clear there are 2 diametrically different approaches to how these 2 candidates will choose justices for the U.S. Supreme Court. That is important, vitally important. And I would say personally, and I'm married 40 years, 5 grown children, 7 grandchildren. I want a nation for my grandchildren and children that has that kind of robust approach to the free exercise of religion, that respects the dignity of every human life. These issues matter. And in my personal opinion, and I'm speaking personally now, to not vote is to vote for the wrong person. I believe this is the most consequential election, speaking personally, of my lifetime. I know you hear that all the time, but I absolutely believe it, which is why I drove 5 hours to be here today. Now, what Father Frank and Priest for Life is doing and giving us the foundational principles is vitally important. But the selection of these justices matters. Finally, last night, in my opinion, we got to some issues that really matter. I don't want to be sidetracked any longer on much of what has happened during this campaign. We've got less than 3 weeks. So what matters most is the policy that these candidates have clearly stood for. One candidate last night actually tried to defend partial birth abortion. It's reprehensible. Reprehensible. You want to talk about morality? Reprehensible. This election matters. So the justices of the Supreme Court, if it's even only 2, so much hangs in the balance. We're really talking about the American experiment in ordered liberty and whether it will continue. That's how dire I believe it is.
Sir.
Sorry to interrupt. And good for you, whatever it is that you're participating. Should we accept what you're posing as the official doctrine of the entire church?
No, I don't speak on behalf of the whole church,
No,
although I am an
but
ordained
generally,
cleric. Are you talking about Father Frank?
Yeah.
I think what he's proposing in this advertisement, those are the words of Pope St. John Paul II. Those are the words of the bishops in the hierarchy. And all he has spoken about are the fundamental principles that the church proclaims and has a right to proclaim. That is the teaching of the church. And then, of course, it's up to individuals to weigh this decision and to act as faithful citizens. But I would add, because I've been asked as a lawyer, there's a real problem, the dark cloud on the horizon, as to whether the church will continue to be able to speak to these moral issues. Because if we keep going down the path we're going and allow a bloated federal bureaucracy determine when a moral issue is, quote, political, and therefore has to be kept behind the doors of a church, that will erode the very understanding of religious freedom expressed in the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution. And in this instance, that's what I wanted to emphasize as a constitutional lawyer. Father, I let you talk about whether you're speaking for the church.
No, we speak as priests to do what we're ordained to do. And that is why, as co-workers of the bishops, we're always quoting them, and of course our Holy Father. But the teachings of the Church, of course, are found in a lot of very key documents that also say a lot about elections, political responsibility, and as I mentioned at the outset, a key element of the teaching is the common good. So you have, obviously, the Catechism, then you've got encyclicals like Evangelii Vitae and others. Then you've got the compendium of the social teachings of the church. That is a beautiful document. It's a book, actually. And it talks about the whole range of social issues, which, of course, this comparison piece also touches on a number of those social justice issues. And then, of course, all of these documents are rooted in one overriding document, which is sacred scripture, the Bible. But I'm glad, sir, that you bring that up, because it also it touches on something that I was talking about very briefly in my extended remarks, but it's good to emphasize again. There's a difference between what the church teaches and how then what conclusion do you come to about how to apply it in public life? So, and this is where, again, it differs from issue to issue. In the official teaching, Catechism, Compendium, Bible, in the official teaching, you read, You may never kill the innocent, and you may never authorize the killing of the innocent. That is official, dogmatic church teaching. Now, how does that translate into a policy on abortion? Well, it only translates into one policy on abortion. You can't do it. How does that translate into a policy on immigration? I don't know. Nobody knows. No bishop, no pope can tell you how it translates. Because that's the job of the legislator. To figure out, how do we take the principle that these are human beings too? They have rights. Their families have rights. We have to respect them. We have to protect them. Well, what does that mean then about what the process of becoming a legal citizen, and if you're here illegally, you get sent back or come back after a certain time? Or how do you, there is no immigration law written in the catechism. There's no page of the catechism that you get that is a bill that you could give to the president to sign. There's no such thing, because it's then the duty of the legislator to figure out how best to apply it. And even when they figure it out and they come to a conclusion, you can't say that that bill is church teaching. All you can say is, here's our best attempt in this country at this time to implement principles we believe in. Okay, so there is that key distinction. Listen, we've taken a lot of your time, and we appreciate each and every one of you. And again, let me say that we do this with the highest regard and respect for those who disagree in the political world and among our fellow citizens. But together we love this nation, and let's see if we can go forward together to do the best for that nation in the weeks to come. God bless you all.
Just want to thank all of you for coming today, and especially our associate priests, Father Dennis Wild, and Father Brian, Father Dave Dybel, who came in early this morning from Michigan. We want to thank you. I just want to say one thing. This is 3 more weeks to go. I worked with Father Pavone, Priest for Life, for 20 years now, I think it is. One of the things I'm very encouraged about are these tools that we've provided to the faithful and people who are interested. Is the extraordinary, in all the many years I've been there, I've never seen the phone calls coming into our offices wanting copies of the ad. Some folks out in Ohio are printing hundreds and thousands of the ad in postcard form. They are pushing and giving it 100%, as are we. But thank you so much. We got 3 weeks to go, and we're going to give it all we have. Thank you, Father Frank, and for all of you for coming. Please see Leslie Palma, our communications director, at the back if you need any further information. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Hey, that was great. Okay. You gonna take it, or you want me to take it?
No, it's for you.
We're gonna have lunch. We'll have lunch.
I must apologize. We had a problem with our sound, and I didn't get your remarks there at the end. And I wondered if you would just talk a little bit about this wonderful passage.
So thanks for being here.
Gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'm going to stand here so we can press club in the background here. Okay, right there is good. All right, John, you need a sound check? Oh, you were good.